After the war, anti-Semitism remained official in the sense that it was laid out in government memos.
By the end of the war, what we can see is that there was a reasonably widespread view in government that a liberal policy towards Jews would not be taken. Immigration was opposed in particular by the Department of Justice and by the Department of Industry and Commerce. It was believed that Ireland was a Catholic country which had strong antipathy to Jews, but there was also a very strong view held quite widely that Jews didn't fit in, that they were different, that they were exploitative, that they would actually not become Irish, that they would not become part of the society. And when you actually look at the figures, there's very, very few Jews actually allowed in at any stage after 1945.
It is unfortunately the case that two civil servants with pivotal roles in dealing with Jews were in fact anti-Semites. One was Charles Bewley, who was an official in the Irish legation in Berlin. He had become fairly enamoured with the Nazi project and indeed was quite enthusiastic about Nazi discrimination against Jews. He remained in post right through the 1930s. Another civil servant, Peter Berry, an official in the Department of Justice, who was regarded as a friend by a number of people in Dublin's Jewish community, used his position as a civil servant to advocate discrimination against Jewish refugees.
My father, Robert Briscoe, was one of the founder members of the Fianna Fáil party. A lot of people don't realise that an Irish Jew was one of the founders. That mightn't go down well with some people, but nevertheless that's what he was. And then he was elected to the Dáil in 1928, and he stayed in the Dáil without a break through successive elections until he retired in 1965. So my father, after the war, was trying to get just a few Jewish refugees into Ireland. Palestine was closed, nobody wanted them, but this country did not allow them in. And the unfortunate thing was that my father at that time was very friendly with the Secretary of the Department of Justice, who had total control over who got visas and who didn't. And his name was Peter Berry. And my father and Peter Berry were on first name terms. It was Peter this and Bob that. And Peter Berry used to come to our house. My father used to go to Peter Berry's apartment, I think it was in Clyde Road, but I used to drive my father because my father didn't like driving. So I was actually party to these meetings where Peter Berry would say to my father, "I'm doing the best I can." And it's very, very difficult and making all sorts of excuses. My father really thought that Peter Berry was doing his best. And because of the Freedom of Information Act, when the memos that Peter Berry had been writing to other departments got out, saying that under no circumstances are we to take these people in, they don't assimilate, they etc., etc. I was so shocked when I saw this, because I had met this man, I had heard this man, I had watched this man's lips, that for the first time I was glad that my father was dead, that my father was not alive to witness the way he had been abused by Berry's lies.
The most profound images were those of the child survivors. What to do with these pitiful orphans of the death camps?
In April 1943, De Valera agreed in principle to accept 500 Jewish children from Vichy, France. The Irish Red Cross contacted officials and asked them that when discussing the project in public, in effect, that no reference would be made to the fact that these children were Jewish, so that when the project was publicised, it would be publicised as a project for refugee children, not for Jewish children. In 1944, Oliver J. Flanagan challenged De Valera in the Dáil and asked him about Jewish children. De Valera replied that he knew of no such children, that he had no details of, in effect, of Jewish children. I think it says something about Irish society at that time, that Irish leaders seemed to be afraid to admit that they were helping Jewish children flee the Holocaust. I think it says something about the level of anti-Semitism at that time, that Jewish children could only be helped by the Irish government by stealth.
By 1944, it was too late for the 500 children. It would be the end of the war before any Jewish refugees were in a position to come to Ireland. Finally, in 1947, 100 Jewish children were given a temporary home in Ireland.
It is important that the Irish were prepared to acknowledge responsibilities in respect of the children, but it was in a very severely constrained context. They were not going to become citizens of Ireland. They were not going to become permanent residents. I think the more general point is that despite the victory for a more liberal position in respect of the children, overall, very few Jews actually arrived in Ireland.
By the 1970s, Ireland had put its past as a haven for Nazis behind it. However, one case would reignite the debate once again. In 1976, the small rural community of Mahonbridge in County Waterford became the centre of a media circus. Dutch millionaire Peter Menton, who divided his time between Waterford and Holland, had just been exposed as a war criminal. You've collected over the years.
Yeah, I collected
newspaper cuttings. Local historian Sean Murphy has followed the Menton case since the story first broke. You had seen them and you knew them.
Oh yeah, well, we knew them. Everybody knew that they were there. Peter Menton was living in Cumber House. His wife Meta was living there. Everybody knew that he was a Dutch businessman. When Menton would come, it was a very important occasion. Like, everybody would know that he had come because the local driver would have been sent to collect him from the airport and bring him down. There'd be a bit more excitement around the place that he was around, you know.
I think he was known as a retired millionaire art collector, and he kept very much to himself. I think even the locals up there, apart from the people who worked in the house and around the place, I think very few people saw little of him.
Well, he did invite in people, like was Stephen Sheila invited in for tea, and people would be invited in now and again. He spoke to us about his house in Bellericum, which he said was the largest thatched house in Holland. And he also said that he had an Olympic-sized swimming pool. We found this a little bit disturbing. Well, not disturbing, but, you know, unsettling in that. Why would a very wealthy man be boasting to myself and Sheila, who had no interest in the largest this or the largest swimming pool? It's like kind of a very wealthy person boasting to the local yokels what he had in Holland or what he had on the moon, when they didn't even know where Holland was.
Menton was in the lumber business, so he came to Poland very often and then decided to stay. And already before the war he became a multi-millionaire. Menton got acquainted with Isaac Pistiner, who was a business partner. He did a lot of business with him. And he got very friendly with the entire Pistiner family, also with the nephew of Isaac Pistiner, a guy called Habib Kanan. That young boy adored Peter Menton, and he very often talked with his so-called uncle Peter Menton about his plans to move to Palestine, and Menton even encouraged him to do so. And when he finally decided to move, to go to Palestine, it was Menton who went with him to the station, to the railway station in Lvov, to say goodbye to him. Kanan joined the British Army during the Second World War in Palestine. And in, I think, 42, he met in Tel Aviv a guy from Poland. He knew his family, and he also knew about Menton. So Kanan then inquired and asked the guy, how is my family and how is Uncle Peter? And then the guy answered, oh my God, you don't know the story. I said, no, what happened? He said, well, your so-called Uncle Peter has killed your entire family.
Kanan dedicated his life to capturing Menton with little success until Hans Knoop discovered his story.
I was an editor of a news magazine in Holland, and got a phone call from an old lady who I knew very well. She started to talk to me about a newspaper interview which appeared in the Saturday issue of the Telegraph. It was an interview with a guy called Menton, a multimillionaire, one of the biggest art collectioners in the Netherlands. She said, I am the correspondent in the Netherlands of the most prestigious and authoritative newspaper in Israel called Haaretz. And there is a guy working there called Habib Kanan, and Menton has killed part of his family.
Hans contacted Kanan, who told him the terrible details of Menton's crime.